If you're looking for a budget smartphone, you might want to consider the Motorola Moto G35 5G, because at the time of filming and in the UK it can be found for just £130. And for that you're getting a pretty stylish proposition, a 120Hz display, 128GB of internal storage with 4GB of RAM, a 50MP rear shooter with a 16MP selfie camera, and a 5000mAh battery. Now in this review you can see if it's actually worth its price tag and of course how it performs across the board. Now to kick things off, I would just like to quickly point out that within the box you'll find a see-through silicone case and a pretty long USB Type-A to Type-C cable. Here you will not find a power brick and therefore you'll have to purchase this as additional extra, which might come as a disappointment to certain individuals. Now this does actually bring me on to its design, and subjectively I really do love what the manufacturer has done. It feels really nice in hand. The buttons on the right hand side are also pretty good. You've got a volume rocker and a power on and off switch, and this actually doubles up as a fingerprint sensor. And yes, the fingerprint sensor does actually work pretty well, although it does take a little bit of time to respond in comparison to some of the ultrasonic sensors you'd find on more premium offerings. You do also have face unlock in case you're wondering, so therefore it's actually pretty handy when it comes to actually utilizing the phone on a day-to-day basis. Now in terms of the rear design, you've got a plastic back in the black finish, or you've got an eco leather, such as in the pictured leaf green or available in the guava red models. I actually do love the texture of the eco leather because it feels a bit more premium than what its price tag would actually indicate. Now with that said, it has got an all plastic frame and therefore it is worth considering that if you're going to be potentially dropping the phone, you might want to pair it up with a case. The phone itself weighs in between 188 to 191 grams, depending on the chosen model. Now the thing I don't like about its design is that there is a rear camera bump, and therefore if you're going to be laying it flat on a table and for example typing or gaming, then the phone itself is going to be constantly rocking. This is pretty much the case with a lot of modern smartphones, but it's just something I thought I should mention in this video. Now one thing that really does stand out to me as someone who has reviewed over 270 different monitors is its display. See, at this price point you're getting a 6.72 inch 120Hz IPS LCD panel with HDR10 support and a resolution of 1080x2400. Therefore meaning that everything does actually look pretty sharp given its 1080p display. Sure enough, it's not going to give you the high resolution and therefore better pixel density of some more expensive alternatives, but in the grander scheme of things, I don't really have any complaints. It also does get pretty bright. With the automatic mode set, I was able to reach up to 800 nits of peak brightness. In the normal mode, with the auto mode therefore disabled, I reached 571 nits, and it does also get all the way down to 5.45 nits. What this effectively means that the phone will get really bright in a bright sunlit condition and therefore will be perfectly visible. Its IPS display has got good viewing angles and its minimum brightness does get pretty dim, although it's not as dim as some alternatives out there, but nonetheless I do think it's going to be perfectly usable even in a completely pitch black environment. Now aside from this, the display itself is made up of Corning's Gorilla Glass 3, therefore giving you some scratch resistance. Although it's worth pointing out over here that my unit did not come with a pre-applied screen protector, so therefore it might be something that you might want to consider in order to prolong the overall look and feel of the smartphone. Now another really important factor for a lot of individuals, including myself, is camera performance, so let's actually delve into it. Now at the rear you've got a 50MP f1.8 wide lens and an 8MP f2.2 ultra wide. Now the latter doesn't actually perform all that well. In normal lighting conditions you'll be able to see that it softens up the image quite a lot. And when it comes to low light conditions it really does struggle, not only when it comes to noise but also in terms of getting that level of detail. Truthfully I would avoid using the ultra wide lens altogether where possible, but I do appreciate its inclusion because it can be handy in certain scenarios. Now when it comes to the main lens itself, it does actually perform pretty well in normal lighting conditions. See here, the overall dynamic range is pretty nice, the colours pop and don't seem overly saturated, and my skin tone looks actually pretty natural, at least in my eyes. It's also nice to see that the bokeh effect is done pretty well, albeit sometimes a little bit over sharpened. Now in this respect, I do feel that a lot of people will appreciate the Moto G35's rear camera performance, at least with the normal lens, because when it comes to sharing on social media or with friends and family, I think it does a far sufficient job, specifically at this price point. Now you have also got 2x zoom that you might want to utilize, but it does go all the way up to 6x digital zoom. Now it's not exactly going to give you a huge amount of zoom in comparison to some more expensive alternatives, but here you'll probably want to use it sparingly, because while zooming in, specifically at 6x, it does become quite blurry, and therefore means that when it comes to, let's say, sharing with friends or family, or indeed just looking at your photos back on the PC, you'll feel that it's actually quite blurry. Now, apart from that, I would like to point out that when it comes to pulling out your smartphone and taking a quick image, well, sometimes it's a bit sluggish. And yes, indeed, that means that when it comes to taking that photo that you're looking for, you might have missed it because the phone itself not only takes some time to take the image, but also process it. And this is in part due to the chipset that Motorola have used. And more on that a little bit later. Now, nonetheless, it is nice to see that you've got a few editing tools, such as the Magic Eraser tool, which actually does work a treat. Sure enough, it's not going to be flawless in certain scenarios, but I do find it a great inclusion specifically at this price point. Now let's move on and talk about the selfie camera. And here you've got a 16 megapixel shooter at f2.5. It does a decent job even with those portrait shots, and when it comes to the overall skin tones, well, it's pretty good as well. Although yet again I did find that the phone was over sharpening certain images at certain points, but it's not exactly a deal breaker. In terms of its low light performance, however, it's actually, again, pretty poor. It doesn't deal too well with having lower amount of light when it comes to going to the lens, and therefore means that you'll be able to see quite a lot of noise and a lot of blurriness in certain conditions. Now, another element that's actually pretty poor, at least in my eyes, is the video recording capabilities. See, at the front you can shoot 1080p 30, while at the rear you can shoot 4K 30 and 1080p 30. Indeed, over here you've got no 60 FPS option, which in my opinion should really be included even at this price point, especially given the fact that you've got a 120Hz display. That 30 FPS just feels a little bit sluggish. Nonetheless, when it comes to the overall video capability and the stability of it, it's actually pretty shocking. Indeed, over here there's pretty much no stabilization that I was able to notice, and in this respect means that camera shake is a real thing, not something I would expect to be saying in 2025. Nonetheless, over here, if you're going to be shooting video, I'd highly suggest staying at a standstill and then panning the camera yourself, rather than moving around with it. In this respect, it means that you're just going to be able to get a little bit of a better shot without having to worry about that old school camera shake, which I think was a thing of the past, but I guess I was wrong. In terms of its low light capabilities, it's also pretty poor. Yet again over here, very much like taking still photography, video capabilities in low light conditions is severely impacted by the amount of noise and in terms of the detail that the lenses are able to attain. So next up, let's talk about the overall raw performance of this smartphone. And here you've got a 6nm Unisoc T760 chipset, which has an octa-core processor and a Mali G57 GPU. Now from my benchmarks on Geekbench 6, it didn't perform that well. 743 in the single core and 2143 in multi-core. As for GFX Bench, which goes through a bunch of different sorts of tests, I recorded between 3 and 50 FPS, which yet again is actually pretty bad. But in this respect, it's no surprise. Given the overall price point of the smartphone, the benchmarks are not exactly going to be screaming the best sort of scores. When it comes to the actual day-to-day usage, basic gaming will certainly be fine, but any sort of intense gaming and something that is graphically intense will actually be really of a struggle on this smartphone. Nonetheless, just something worth considering. Furthermore, you've only got 4GB of RAM, although the manufacturer does also give you a virtually expandable 8GB of RAM, at least on this model, and you've even got an 8 plus 8GB RAM model as well. Now in this respect, the RAM is fine, although it's actually taken up by the system as well. So therefore when it comes to multitasking, it can feel a little bit sluggish. Now this does actually bring me on to the overall software. And here at the box, at least at the time of filming, you've got Android 14. You've got good options and it's pretty simple and doesn't feel too overwhelming. You've not got too much bloatware either, and yes indeed you can delete some of those apps that have been pre-installed. Now when it comes to the overall user interactions, well here I do feel it's actually quite nice. But it is yet again paired up with the chipset that's been utilized, and therefore means sometimes when you're going between certain apps, or indeed let's say going between certain menus, it can feel a little bit slow to respond. Now when it comes to usage, you might be wondering, how does it perform when it comes to its 5000 mAh battery? Well, here in my controls benchmarks, I netted 18 hours and 10 minutes, which is not exactly the best sort of figures, but do consider some of the other phones that are mentioned in the table are actually a lot more expensive. Now with that in mind, when it comes to just general day-to-day usage, I would say that if you're a light to medium user, you should be able to expect roughly 1 to 1.5 days of actually having the phone without needing to charge it. If, however, you're a heavy mobile gamer, then expect to carry around a power bank with you at any given point. Now it is also worth considering over here that the USB Type-C port only takes up to 18 watts of power, and therefore means that when it comes to fast charging capabilities, well, it's not quite there with some of its competitors or indeed some more premium offerings out there. Expect a full charge to take you roughly 2 hours to attain. It is also worth considering over here that the phone itself doesn't provide you any sort of reverse charging capabilities, and nor does it have wireless charging either. Not overly concerned, at least at this price point, but just something I thought I should highlight in this review. Now to conclude this review, I would like to talk about some of its features. And here you've got stereo speakers, which in my opinion are an excellent inclusion. I'm not really sure about the labeling of Dolby Atmos, but nonetheless you've got some customization options, which are certainly appreciated. Therefore meaning this phone actually does do pretty well when it comes to media consumption, or indeed when it comes to light gaming. Furthermore, you would have noticed that there's a 3.5mm jack, which is absolutely fantastic. Yes, indeed, it's actually quite rare in this modern era, so it's nice to see that Motorola have still included it at this price point. Now, the 3.5mm jack also gives you the ability to use the FM radio app. So yes, indeed, you'll have to connect up a set of headphones or earphones via the 3.5mm jack in order to utilize the app, because it serves as an antenna. This means it can be quite handy in certain scenarios, for example, let's say if you're going to be camping. Now, apart from that, you have also got Wi-Fi and Bluetooth version 5.0, which does actually work pretty well. And you've also got expandable storage up to 1 terabyte, which is absolutely fantastic. Indeed, you've got a micro SD expansion slot, which can be found next to the nano SIM card slot. Now, this means that you can expand on the 128 gigabytes of storage, which comes as standard on the G35, and go up to 1 terabyte, plus 128 gigabytes, of course, with the internal storage. This means that if you're going to be taking a lot of photos, then you might want to consider doing that. And given the fact that a lot of modern phones don't offer you expandable storage, it's a great inclusion. Now elsewhere, I would like to mention that the haptics of the smartphone do feel a little bit cheap. Indeed, over here when it comes to typing quite fast, it just feels that there's a bit of a springy nature. Not exactly a deal breaker, but something I thought I should highlight in this review. So with all that in mind, it brings me on to my verdict of the Moto G35. And here, the phone is not quite perfect. The battery life could have been a little bit improved, the charging speeds as well. The chipset performance is a little lackluster, but to be expected at this price point. The low light photography and also recording capabilities are actually quite poor. But elsewhere, you've also got really nice camera quality, at least at this price point, when it comes to normal lighting conditions, a decent selfie camera with portrait capabilities, a 120Hz IPS display that's not only fluid but also quite vivid. Then you've also got a really nice aesthetics, and furthermore you have got expandable storage, a side-mounted fingerprint sensor, and certain useful tools which are found on the Android operating system that doesn't have too much bloatware. Now given all of this, and of course considering its overall price, it gets my value award. Now I'd be curious to know what you make of the phone down in the comment section below, and if you'd pick it over some rival alternatives. Now, if you have enjoyed this detailed independent review, definitely do consider dropping a like, subscribing and hitting that bell notification, all of which would be greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Totally Dubbed, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.